Welcome to the Queer Spirit Podcast. I'm your host, Nick Venegoni. Here we have conversations with artists, healers, and activists who enliven the LGBTQ communities and who empower our queer spirits to flourish. My guest today is Julie Dreyer. Julie is a board-certified hospital chaplain who helps others meet their emotional and spiritual needs. She completed a Masters of Divinity at a Portland Tibetan Buddhist college, where she teaches classes, facilitates meditation, and music practices. Her sense of the world has been shaped by practicing within various spiritual and embodiment traditions. In search of wholeness, Julie spent 4 years traveling the world sharing sacred music with people on the streets, in nature, and intentional communities. She's grateful to all her teachers who continue to inspire her to be with what is. Today, we talk about her journey of self-discovery with the healing power of music as a support for suffering, from depression to end-of-life challenges. We also talk about her new path as an interfaith hospital chaplain supporting others in their struggles toward healing and facing the unknown. Hi, Julie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. It's good to be here.
So I wanted to start out by talking about your work right now as a chaplain. And I was wondering if you could start out by telling us what a chaplain is and how you decided to become a chaplain.
Yes. So a chaplain is someone who helps other people with their spiritual and emotional needs. And the context can change. There are chaplains who work in hospitals, prisons, armed forces, and I work in a hospital, and so for the patients, the families, and the staff in the hospital, I'm there as a resource to engage with them when they are going through challenging times and also in the times, that are more celebratory.
Mm-hmm.
So chaplaincy started as a Christian practice. The person who started it, I'm forgetting his name, but maybe I can get that to you. He himself had gone through a psychiatric issue and found himself in the hospital and was inspired to create something that eventually would be called chaplaincy, where people were getting help with, that part of themselves. And so over the years, it has, I would say more recently, it has opened up to be more interfaith. And so where I work, I actually work in a Catholic hospital, but I serve people of all and no religion. And so I feel like, there's a movement toward bringing into spiritual care departments people who are non-Christian, because it does, at least where I am in Portland, I don't know how that is in the rest of the country, but having, in my team, there are 2 of us who are Buddhist, and we now have a Jewish chaplain intern working for us. So there's definitely, they see a need to have people who are non-Christian in that world. So I feel like it's trying to expand beyond that original Christian concept.
And can you share with us how you decided to become a chaplain yourself?
Yeah. So, my journey starts, I was an engineer and worked as an engineer for 9 years, and then became disenfranchised with that line of work and just not being able to get behind, what we were doing, working for a microprocessor company and wanting to put out a new product every 2 years, which meant that, the old products would need to be discarded. So when I left that career, I had really a motivation to go into my own spiritual self and to really figure out who I was. And from there, I started teaching yoga and also leading groups of people through music and movement and meditation. And when I really got into the music, the sound healing part of it, I eventually would travel around the world sharing music with, people that I encountered. And one of my motivations to do that was, I had felt some tension with my own family of origin from what I felt was a tension between religious difference. And through that time of travel and really going out on my own and going to places that were important to me as I was growing up in my childhood. The first year I lived in my van, traveled around the North America and went to places that, as a child I would go to, and as a family we would spend time. And so I went there and did ritual, and really around this intention of coming back together with my family. And the second year I went to Europe and spent time, in my more recent ancestry, my blood ancestry, visiting Ireland, Scotland, Germany. And while I was there, I was living in an intentional community in Scotland, and I learned of my sister's cancer diagnosis. And at that time, I was in denial, so now I can kind of look back from what I've learned through my chaplaincy training, that maybe one step that people have to kind of go through is to acknowledge the reality of the death or the loss. And so when I was in Scotland, I continued to do more practices around really trying to find myself. I had been depressed for much of my life and had suicidal ideation at times. And so a lot of my ritual would be outside. And I remember a time at the Findhorn River where I, just was taken by this river that was colored by the dirt of the river. So it was like red. It almost looked like blood flowing down. And it was just a really powerful time where I, thought about myself in relation to the world and how I just didn't want to be here anymore. I just even thought about what would happen if I just jumped into this river. And I had heard stories about people who had died in this river. It was that strong and, just all-encompassing. And so in that moment, I, did ritual with song and prayer, just really trying to come to this wholeness in myself. And so, I go through these moments of feeling despair, and then through ritual, through music, I would come out and just have these insights and this will to keep going. And really one of the biggest things that kept me going was my family. I would say mostly my daughter, just not wanting, to leave her behind without a mother. And as I was going through this journey, of course I'm inspired to come into my own, to be with my own challenges, or, to be with that really, it's just not an easy feeling to be suicidal and feel like you don't want to go on. And so a lot of my practice was just to continually be with that. And even to this day, it's something that I still need to do, is to be with that discomfort and to keep going. And found my way to Asia was the next stop on my travels. And there I was going to experience where my musical inspiration came from. So the harmonium instrument that comes to us, wanted to go, these where this lineage came from. So I was at this Buddhist monastery and with these teachers who I just wanted to know more about how they were able to be as they were, just so real and authentic, engaging with the difficult things, and at the same time, just, having such a joy. And so I ended up spending 6 months in the monastery and doing a lot of practices. And during that time, part of the practice, part of the conversations that I would be having was about the reality of death. And not only, the reality, I think, the first place we look is the reality of my own death. Like, I am going to die someday. And I think in that moment or during that time is when I really realized that I was denying the reality that my sister was going to die. And I think I wasn't engaging with it because I didn't want to engage in that reality. And so it was through, being in this monastery that I realized, yes, my sister's going to die probably before I would, and eventually I would die someday. And it just really inspired me to prioritize my life and to live it in a way that felt important. And so I started, doing practices that I had hoped that would help my sister and her husband and her 2 kids as she continued to engage with the cancer. And so while I was in a silent retreat in this monastery, I had gotten a call from my family saying that my sister was no longer alert. And I had to make a decision about whether I would go back to be with her or whether I would stay where I was. And I flew out the next day, and 35 hours later, I was in her living room in Wisconsin. And after that, she had become alert. And I will say, when I talked with my mom on the phone when I was in Nepal and kind of trying to make the decision about whether to go back or not, I wasn't sure if I was ever going to see my sister, hear her again. And so I felt compelled to ask my mom to make sure she found out what her songs are.
What does that mean, her songs?
So, for me, song is an important way to connect with people. And, at the time, it wasn't consciously that I even thought of that. It just, it was the first thing to come up. And now, looking back, she did have songs. Actually, she had this whole playlist that she would listen to as she was going through chemo treatment. And, these songs would, of course, be played at her funeral. And these songs I learned to play myself. And so it's a way that I can keep her memory alive, because songs for me are a way to help me inspire emotion. As a society and, as a person who had to really work at feeling and expressing my feelings, music is one of the ways that helps me to do that. And it makes it easier to feel. And so, when I need to remember my sister now, who obviously she has died, but whenever I hear Hallelujah, Amazing Grace, and this other song called Blessings by a Christian artist called, I think her name is Laura Story. Every time I hear those songs, I think of my sister. And when I asked my mom that question, find out what her songs were, I wanted to make sure I heard from my sister, the songs that would put her by. So when I was traveling back to Wisconsin, that 35 hours, I was in this period of uncertainty. I had really no way to connect with my family. They, traveling from India back to Wisconsin, there was no way that they could have even, been in touch with me. So I was, out of touch in that way. And really, the only thing that kept me going were these practices that I had learned in the monastery. And one of them, or, centering around them, are mantras. And again, coming back to that importance of song, if you will, to, entrain my mind in a way that's more beneficial to others and to myself. And just in that time, feeling like I was benefiting them, even though I wasn't there physically. And so that's what really helped me as I went back. And then once I got back and, my sister did become alert again, and she would have, what they call a rally. A lot of people, as they're approaching death, they will come to this moment of almost like, people wonder if, oh my goodness, are they healed? Are they getting better? But it's this rally where sometimes people really wake up, they get their strength back. And in my sister's circumstance, she was laying in her living room in a hospital bed, for 3 weeks. When I got back there, she lasted another 3 weeks, and I spent that time by her bedside. But there was one day where she was able to get out of the bed. She got into the wheelchair, and her entire family was there in the living room. And she got up and she just, spoke these words of wisdom, saying that, she's lived her life. She's made amends for her mistakes. She has no regrets. She knows where she's going. The Christian faith was still important to her. And so she just wanted to make sure that we knew that, she feels good about where she's going. She feels at peace. And basically, wanting to make sure that we're okay. And so, I think the whole time that I was with her in that time, I did not want to be anywhere else. I just felt so compelled to be there with her. And I think, this was the seeds of being planted around, potentially looking at a career in chaplaincy. And I will say the other sweet memory that I have during that time, and really, I think emphasizing this capacity that I think I have to be around death. And, certainly as somebody who has thought about death for a lot of their life in a way that, hasn't always been the most beneficial thoughts, but I think being around that and having those thoughts has helped me to be, within that sphere, within, knowing that death is imminent and kind of in the air. There was a night where her husband was staying with her nonstop and, didn't want to leave her side. But, after 3 weeks, you start to need to take care of yourself. And so he finally did let me stay a night with her. And so during this night, it was just her and I, and it was the middle of the night, and she woke up and I went by her side and, she grabbed my hand and she looked straight into my eyes and she said, "I'm so scared, so afraid." And in that moment, I didn't know what to say. This was new to me. I'd never been around somebody who was dying. I'd been around animals, not a human. And so in my kind of family origin, we would kind of divert the discomfort and kind of change the subject. And so I felt like I did that, and I felt like I wasn't able to engage with her fear in the way that I would have liked to. I mean, in the moment, I was there for her. I didn't run away. I didn't shut her down. I think I just said, I actually don't even remember what I said. It might have been something like, you have nothing to worry about. But what I wished I had been able to do, and through my chaplaincy training, I have been able to engage and then offer this to other people who are in that same situation, and that's to engage their fear. And, I've since had a number of people who have said that very same thing to me in that same way, just, I'm so afraid, I don't know what to expect. And so through learning to be more skillful, I've been able to offer to them, this conversation, like, what is that fear? What are you most afraid about? To help them really talk through it, to get to the bottom of it and just to be with that fear, to be in that discomfort.
Yeah, I think this is a really important conversation. I'm glad we sort of ended up here, even though we didn't really plan on it. But, I think that through your work, you're probably encountering people who are afraid of death, or if they're not going to die, but there's some health issue going on. They're afraid of losing some part of their senses or their capacity or their independence. But also, I think that it's an important thing to talk about just in the world in general. In my work, I encounter a lot of people who come in and they have fear about what's happening socially and politically, as queer people or as people of color or any other oppressed group. And I also am having people who come in and talk about their fear about what's happening to the planet and environmentally. And I think that it is a very Western thing or American thing to go into denial and to go into numbing or distraction away from fear or the discomfort. And I know that you and I have probably talked about this before, both having studied Buddhism, but in Buddhism, it's very much about going into the discomfort. And a lot of people, they're afraid of going into it because I think if they go into it, they won't come out. So I'm wondering what you might, if you could share maybe a little bit more about how you help people go into fear courageously. I know that might be kind of an oxymoron, but how do you go into fear courageously and not get overwhelmed by it? Or maybe just share your own experience about how you've done that too, which you've already kind of done.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy. I mean, that is a real fear. And I think this is why in our society, talking about death, talking about suicide has not been something, that we do. I think that's part of that denial. Yeah, talking about politics, engaging with the race issue. I mean, this is something that for so long was not talked about. And so I think, one of the things that's been important for me is to talk about these issues, to engage in conversation. And I think with people who don't think the same, so people who have differences. So yeah, I think it's important to have these conversations with people who do have different beliefs or, different ideas about politics and different social issues that are happening. And I know it's not easy. And I think the practice for myself really is to experience my own discomfort And I think my greatest example of this is when I do feel the suicidal ideation that I don't want to, like the suffering is too great. Like I can't be with it anymore, is to just to continue to be with it. And I think, finding for me those, like having reasons why I wouldn't want to in my life. So having my daughter, having this belief for myself that, being Buddhist, like I believe that I will continue, not the I in the way that I am Julie right now, but in this way, I will continue. My suffering is not going to end if I ended my life. And, if I did that, I would cause more people suffering. And so really I come back to my Buddhist center about that not being the most beneficial thing. And so that's what kind of keeps me not acting on it. But I think, just going into those really, really hard feelings. And I think being open about it, sharing with more people. I've started to open up with friends and family and coworkers even to normalize, because I know that I'm not alone. I know that these, feelings are increasing with all of the chaos that you've mentioned going on in the world. Like people are really struggling. And so I think knowing that you're not alone can be helpful. So being open to sharing it, even though, it can be shameful. Like I feel ashamed at times when I feel that way, but sharing it, I think, can help others. And I think, in the times when I'm not feeling that intense level of not wanting to be here, like, just continuing with my practice of just sitting with myself. And by sitting, I don't necessarily mean sitting on the cushion, although I feel like that is important. Although now that I work 40 hours a week and in a really intense work where I'm, constantly there for other people, sitting on the cushion isn't always where I can do my practice. And so bringing that practice into my work and, knowing that being with other people, being an ally for people of color in my work where they might be getting racist slurs thrown at them, and, just showing up and being an ally, being somebody who will walk alongside them and, know that they're not alone, and help them to know that there are strategies that the hospital has in place that we can address. Like no staff member in our hospital they just shouldn't take these racist slurs. Like there are things that we can do to the patients and the families who come in to address that. And, that they're just not this, that they don't have to take it. So I think, that's one of the ways in which I have been able to show up, for coworkers who experience this kind of thing. And I think personally being there, as Catholic hospital, their doctrine does say that marriage is between a man and a woman. And so as someone who is inside the system, if you will, I have been able to meet, for example, two dads who were in having a baby with a surrogate mother, and to meet them with love and acceptance, and to actually they're surprised that, wow, they were pretty afraid walking into a Catholic hospital and how they might be met. And so I think, it shows the openness, I think, in at least this place that I'm at in, the Catholic organization, to know that, yes, their doctrine says that this is such, but we are really here to serve all, especially the poor and the vulnerable. And knowing that, people who are oppressed because of their lifestyle, that, that's part of the population that we are there to help and just, ensure that they feel welcome. And so I feel like that's part of my role as well, as well as engaging the people who are on the opposite side of things. I think that's probably the harder part for me, this belief that we all truly deserve compassion and care, even if you're someone who, has racist tattoos, or you're, someone who is homophobic. I think that's the harder part for me, is how to be there and, show them also compassion and kindness.
Yeah. Well, again, it comes back to that discomfort piece, right? It's like their discomfort with you and your discomfort with the discomfort they have for you. And how do you show up as someone who's being of service in that place and go into any of your fear or discomfort that comes up in the face of their fear and discomfort. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. I mean, I feel like that we could just continue to go deeper into this. So maybe I'll have to have you back for part 2.
That'd be lovely.
As we start to wind down, I wonder if you can share with us a person, practice, or experience that has supported your queer spirit to flourish.
It's hard to choose just one. Yeah, I will say that being a part of the Buddhist tradition, I have met several queer teachers and practitioners, and I think the most inspiring teaching, that I've learned from the Buddha is that there are all these teachings, and yet they're not set in stone. That, you try them, you experiment with them yourself in your own life, and if it makes sense, then yes, you take it on, and if it doesn't, then you don't. And so the ways that I've seen some queer teachers, Buddhist teachers, really be able to be their authentic self and stand up. One is actually a fairly recent inspiration of mine. I would say in the last few years, I've been following her, and I would say one of my practices in using my white privilege to be an ally is to support people of color who I feel are doing really amazing things in the world, and to support them financially and in any other way that I'm able to. So Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams Sensei is someone that I've been following recently and just so inspired by her work in the Radical Dharma camp is what she guides practices of people to come together to really engage with ideas of race and how to be a better ally. And so, yeah, I think one practice of kind of that putting my life into practice, if you will, or putting my practice into action is to support and be an ally for those that I feel like doing good things in the world. She's written a book with Lama Rod Owens, is another teacher that I feel inspired by. And yeah, I think, as far as practice, we've talked a little bit about that, but just continuing to be with my own discomfort so that I can be with others, to not run away, to not leave this life, but continue to show up.
So can you share with us, you had some resources that you were open to sharing for anyone who's interested in learning more about chaplaincy?
Oh, yeah. So there's a National Chaplaincy Association. It's the Association of Professional Chaplains, and I believe you can find that online at APC. And the college that I attended here in Portland is called Maitripa College. It's Maitrapa College, and they have lots of resources about Buddhist chaplaincy, and there's actually recordings of myself talking about it there as well. And then I guess the last one is that I've done a lot of writing over the years about my sharing music and different practices. And if you're interested in reading that, it's juliedragonfly.com. And yeah, I think from there, you'll have enough information to learn more.
Okay, great. Well, I will also have those links in the show notes for people to find them.
Oh, perfect.
Julie, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure speaking with you and hearing more about your spiritual journey.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
I work with many queer folks who struggle to get their needs met or who suffer from having their boundaries violated by others. Because you may not have been cared for the best, you might have a hard time identifying your needs. Or because you have been violated or bullied, you might not completely understand where exactly your boundaries are. If you'd like some help exploring your needs and building more resilient boundaries, head over to my website and download the free guide, Needs, Boundaries, and Self-Care Support for Queer Folks. This is a short introduction to help you start to shift and change your relationship to yourself and others, and to feel more safe and resourced day to day. So just head over to queerhealingjourneys.com/needs to download your free guide today. To find the resources we discussed today, find the show notes at thequeerspirit.com. And if you enjoyed the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. This will help us reach and support more queer people all over. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.